Hey everyone, it's Mr. Drake. This video takes a look at some of the highlights of labor unrest in the United States in the last 3 decades of the 19th century. There were literally thousands of strikes during this time period, with hundreds of thousands of workers, if not millions of workers, at some point going on strike against their employer. But this just is intended to look at some of the most important labor disputes of that time, events that are important either because of what they led to or who was involved. So with that, let's take a look at some of the important strikes and lockouts and labor disputes and events of this time. The first major labor upheaval that occurred during this time occurred in 1877. It's usually called the Great Strike of 1877. Sometimes you'll see it called the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. It began in Martinsburg, West Virginia, and it started when the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the B&O Railroad, one of the major railroad companies in the eastern part of the U.S., cut wages to its workers for the second time during the year. And the workers decided to essentially walk off the job. And this strike spread beyond West Virginia fairly quickly. It spread along the railroad lines into Maryland, up into Pennsylvania, where we saw the most unrest and most strikes as a result of this occurring. And then it spread west into Chicago, which was obviously a big industrial area at the time, and even in St. Louis as well. It eventually becomes what's called a general strike. Usually strikes occur in a particular industry, like a railroad strike or a mining strike or whatever. General strikes are when workers from all different industries go on strike, often in solidarity with one another. And the weird thing about the railroad strike in 1877, or the Great Strike, whatever you want to call it, is that it didn't really have a union spearheading it. It was spontaneous outbreaks of labor unrest throughout the country. Eventually, it was put down without a whole lot of difficulty. President Hayes sent federal troops into West Virginia and Pennsylvania, especially, to quell the unrest and get the workers back to work, basically ordering them back to work. And the strike eventually peters out after about a month and a half. The effect of the Great Strike of 1877 is that unions realize that they have to become more organized. Because, again, there really wasn't a union at the helm of this one, so it was just a little bit chaotic at times, and violence breaks out without any kind of union guidance telling the workers what they need to do to make the strike successful. So organizations like the Knights of Labor begin to gain members. They begin to try to become more influential as a result of the strike. One of the most important events of this era in terms of how the public perceived organized labor was the Haymarket Riot, which occurred in 1886 in Chicago. This was not a strike. It was actually a rally that had been organized in response to some events during a strike. The workers at the McCormick Mechanical Reaper factory in Chicago were on strike during this time, and there was a conflict between them and the Chicago police, during which several of the workers were killed. The rally at Haymarket Square was organized by radical labor leaders and some anarchists, people who were kind of anti-government, to show solidarity with the workers at the McCormick factory. And there was a series of speakers, most of them fairly radical. There was a pretty big crowd there to again show support for the striking workers. The police arrived on the scene, told the speakers to stop speaking, told the crowd to disperse. Somebody, an unknown, presumably anarchist, threw a homemade bomb towards the police officers. It blew up, sending shrapnel and debris everywhere. It killed 7 police officers and started a chaotic riot during which many people at the rally and some more police officers were killed. Many of the police officers were actually killed by each other because in all the smoke and fire and chaos, a lot of them were emptying their guns into each other, according to an official report of the incident. The Haymarket Riot sets off this big wave of anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner, anti-radical sentiment across the country, what you know as xenophobia, Xeno phobia, means fear of foreigners. A group that sort of organized the Haymarket Riot were rounded up, put on trial. 7 anarchists were sentenced to death, 4 of whom were eventually executed for enticing murder. You know, they weren't accused of actually killing anyone. They weren't accused of throwing the bomb, although it's thought that they may have helped in construction of the bomb. One of the remaining 3 killed himself the evening before he was to be executed to sort of cheat the hangman, I guess. The other 2 were eventually commuted to life in prison and then pardoned in 1893 when it was determined that the trial was essentially kabuki theater and they really didn't have a whole lot of evidence against them. The Haymarket Riot helps lead to the downfall of Knights of Labor because they were seen as being a pretty radical organization and too sympathetic to these anarchists and socialists, and as a result they lost a lot of public support. But the Haymarket Riot, for all of these reasons, you know, leading to this anti-immigrant feeling especially, is seen as sort of a watershed moment in labor history in America. Couple of artifacts relating to Haymarket, the kind of thing you might see on a DBQ at some point, wink wink, nudge nudge. On the left is a handbill that is advertising the rally to be held at Haymarket Square in Chicago on that evening, May 4th, 1886. You'll see there that is in English and in German, indicative of the fact that a lot of immigrants would be attending this rally as well. On the right there is the picture of the 7 men who were sentenced to death for their role in the bombing. The man in the center is August Spiess, who was sort of the leader, chief organizer of the rally. He is one of the 4 who were actually hanged. And one thing I should point out about the date of the Haymarket Riot, May 4th, 1886. May 1st is now known as May Day in a lot of places around the world, and May Day is seen as another day that is celebrated by, you know, socialists, by you know, more radical organized labor elements. You'll often hear about May Day celebrations by workers throughout the world, and one of the reasons it became so big was because of Haymarket. So there you go. If you're one of my students, you've already watched an entire documentary about Homestead, so we're not going to go into a ton of detail on this one. But the Homestead Strike occurred in 1892 in Homestead, Pennsylvania, which is outside of Pittsburgh, at a Carnegie steel plant. The union involved was called the Amalgamated, which is basically the Amalgamated Union of Steel Workers. It was not technically a strike, it was actually a lockout. The workers were kept from coming to work once their labor agreement had expired. They were kept out by Henry Clay Frick, who's pictured there at the bottom, who was Carnegie's essentially superintendent over the mill. And to get the mill working again, they hired Pinkerton detectives to come in and essentially secure the mill and then serve as strikebreakers, which is how these agents were essentially used in a lot of different places. But the residents of Homestead got word that the Pinkertons were arriving on a barge under cover of night, met them at the dock, and essentially had a big standoff with each other, where people were being shot at from both sides. Eventually, the workers went out. The Pinkertons are marched off their boat to jail for their own protection. Boat gets burned, all that. And at this point, everyone was kind of on the workers' side because they saw Carnegie and Frick as being these, greedy capitalist types who were trying to take these men's jobs. But then somebody, an anarchist, broke into Frick's office and tried to kill him. And at that time, once again, labor looks dangerous and unsavory and un-American and all of that, organized labor, that is. So they begin to lose favor, and eventually the workers surrender, and Carnegie's plant becomes non-union for the next several decades. The last event we'll talk about in this video is the Pullman Strike, which occurs in 1894 near Chicago in the town of Pullman, Illinois. Pullman was what we would call a company town. It was built up by George Pullman and the Pullman Palace Car Company to house the employees, and it had stores and schools, and it was like a town. It wasn't incorporated, but it was a community. This was really not that uncommon. Homestead, Pennsylvania would be another example of a company town. The strike occurred because George Pullman, the owner of the Pullman Palace Car Company, he's the inventor of the sleeping train car, by the way, he cut his workers' wages, but he did not cut the rent that the workers had to pay to live in the company-owned housing. So the workers, angry about that, went on strike. And this led to a boycott throughout the upper Midwest of all trains that had Pullman cars attached. So railroad employees would not deal with or operate trains that had these sleeping cars manufactured by the Pullman Company to them. And this was a strike that was, and boycott that was organized by the American Railway Union, led by that guy you see there at the bottom, Eugene Debs. Eventually, federal troops, at the order of President Cleveland, intervened. And the way they intervened was somewhat of a technicality. They began attaching mail cars to all to all trains out in that area, and essentially used as an excuse, saying, well, the striking workers are interfering with the delivery of the mail, which is a federal crime. And so they were able to basically put that injunction in against the workers and force them to work. There was a conflict in Pullman. People were killed on both sides when the militia came in, but eventually the strike is broken. Pullman, after this, was so hated by the people in his town that when he died 3 years later in 1897, his family had him buried in a lead-lined coffin inside a room-sized block of concrete underground that they then covered up with more concrete and then put railroad ties over the top of it to keep any workers from actually digging up his body and doing something horrible with it. That's just how despised he actually was by the workers out there at that time. One effect of the Pullman strike is it leads to the rise in prominence of Eugene Debs, who, despite the fact that he was arrested and thrown in jail for his role in the Pullman strike, becomes a socialist leader once he gets out, and in 1900 actually runs for president on the socialist ticket. And I think he runs for president like 5 times or something like that as well. So now that you've learned about unions and some of the important strikes that occurred during this time, what I want you to think about is this kind of overarching question that we're going to discuss in class if you're one of my kids. How successful were workers and labor unions in achieving their goals? So think about what they wanted versus what they actually got, what the public thought of them, how well the unions were able to endure and actually achieve collective bargaining on behalf of their workers and stuff like that. You might even want to make a little chart in your notes, and we're going to be discussing this in class going forward. So that'll do it for today. Make sure you're keeping up with your reading if you're one of mine, and feel free to ask if you have any questions either in the comment section below or in person if you're one of mine. Cheers.